to Everything's Cleaner in Texas, the show where we spotlight the people, processes, and products that are helping Texas clean freaks fight dirty better. From hospital sterilization teams to cutting-edge technology, from deep cleaning secrets to industry game changers, if it's making Texas fight dirty, we're going to talk about it on this show. My name's Hank Balch, alongside Dusty Glass, and every episode we'll be diving deep with the experts, innovators, and frontline fighters who are setting the gold standard for cleanliness across the Lone Star State. Because in Texas, we don't just fight dirty, we do it big. So grab your boots, buckle up, it's time to get clean. All right, clean freaks, welcome back to Everything's Cleaner in Texas, Sterile Processing's first and only Texas-based podcast. And we've got a fantastic guest in studio with us today, Nate Gonzalez, OR and Supply Chain Operations, based out of the great state of Texas. But Nate's day job takes him kind of far and wide outside of the state. But we're going to be talking about why that is today and a whole bunch of other, I think, really interesting topics that cross over not only into sterile processing, but into our great military. Nate, welcome to the show today.
Hank, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So a little bit about my Texas experience. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, in particular the Pearland area. So I think about the barbecue every single day for at least the past 5 years. I can't wait to be back, but this is kind of a special one because I will be completing my military contract and I'll be settling down. So I can't wait to go back and explore and see what's happened.
Yeah, I spent 9 years outside of Texas when I first graduated college. I went to Kentucky for 9 years. Came back to Texas, went to San Antonio for a couple of years, and then left the state again for 4 years, and just came back about a year and a half ago, going on 2 years. So I feel your pain. I know what it's like for an expatriate to have to leave the state. You miss the barbecue, you miss the Bluebell ice cream. There's just nothing like it. So yeah, we're really looking forward to telling your story today. But we're also looking forward to having you back home, Nate. The title of this episode is Autoclaves Aweigh, my boys, Sterile Processing and the Navy. And obviously, we want to tell a little bit of this crossover story, right? Like you have seen this from multiple perspectives, not only at the frontline technician level, but also into this leadership level as well. So we're going to cover a lot of different bases, but maybe just kind of start us at the beginning. What does training look like? On the civilian side, obviously, most of our listeners will have seen sterile processing training or surgical tech training from the civilian perspectives. I really want to get at in the Navy, when we're talking about these roles and job titles, how are you trained?
So I'm happy to kind of start from the beginning, but I want to preface this with when you join the Navy, let's say that you want to get into the sterile processing world. Well, first of all, you have to be a surgical technologist. There's no way to be a CRCST alone. When I came in and I made the decision to be a surgical technologist, the sterile processing side was a tiny bit foreign to me. That's the thing. And just to start from the beginning, prior to being a surg tech, I went to Fort Sam Houston, which is in San Antonio. I joined as a hospital corpsman, so that's the program that I went through. And just to make a comparison in the civilian terms, this is pretty much a medical assistant combined with an EMT. So we are taught how to provide pre-hospital, inpatient, outpatient, and combat care. Once I graduated that program, I went to a clinic and I was only slotted to be there for 2 years. So once I completed this rotation, I went to be a surg tech. That program is also at this very exact same base in Fort Sam Houston. So we're back to the surg tech side. So the thing is, I went through the overview of the CRCST exam content outline. There isn't anything that we particularly, didn't go over. since we have to be in charge of that stuff, they give us as much as possible, but the only factor that's worth considering is the fact that this program is definitely accelerated, so it lasts about 9 weeks.
Oh, really? The surgical tech program does, or the
entire
CRCST?
Program.
Okay. Wow.
So you're looking at an average of 12 to 24 months in civilian side as far as surgical tech programs, 4 to 12 months for CRCST. Now we got to compress that. So this entire thing was 9 weeks. So it's exactly as crazy as it sounds.
So you saw the look on my face.
Yes, it's as crazy as it sounds. There's a lot of crazy expectations. It's very, very fast-paced. You're tested multiple times before clinicals throughout the didactic phase, and those particular tests are theirs to ensure that you are digesting absolutely everything. And if you did not pass any of these tests, you can't try again. If you did not pass any of them, you are not moving forward. Sounds tough. I guess I guess at least one way to weed out those who don't want it badly enough, and that's just that's just how it is. That makes sense, I guess, for the Navy. But clinicals took place at level 1 trauma centers within San Antonio. We were assigned to sterile processing departments at these trauma centers, and we also, obviously, just like any other Surg Tech program, we had to complete a certain number of cases within each specialty, and at the very end, we got to sit for the CST exam. That part was just another test on top of everything, so I guess almost the cherry on top. That's exactly what the experience was, and there's a lot more, but I'll keep it short. I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah, so by the time you got ready to sit for that CRCST exam, you're probably like, okay, I got this. I've taken like 20 million exams around these kinds of topics. This is probably going to be, kind of decently easy, if we can put it in those terms.
Oh, it was mild.
Okay, good.
compared to the the entirety of the program, it was definitely mild, and I had a smile on my face the entire time.
Okay, yeah. It's a good feeling when you're in one of those tests and you're like, okay, I got this. Everything that I studied is here, and I'm able to do the critical thinking, because every now and then, some of those questions are out of left field. But if you know your content to the level that you're describing, right, this is your job, this is your career, not only in the healthcare trajectory, but this is your career in the military. So it's all dependent on you progressing in this way that you described. I think that's great. I want to go back real quick, though, to the hospital corpsman. Is that what you said was the very beginning?
Yep, that's it. Yep.
So how long was that program?
So that program in particular was about, I want to say it was about 6 months. I could be a little off there, but it's about 6 months. And it was a little bit similar in the sense that you were thrown, 12,000 things in a very limited time frame. We're not learning how to apply a Band-Aid. We are learning how to prepare to save trauma casualties that have TBIs, gunshot wounds, as bad as they can get in combat. We need to be able to provide that initial care perfectly. And when I was
quickly and effectively,
perfectly. You could miss nothing, and it was the same in the sense that you failed a test, you are not moving forward. You are no longer a hospital corpsman. You would have to choose another specialty within the Navy. So,
and that happens like you do basic training, and then you move on to, if you're in that specialty, then you move on to your corpsman training.
Correct.
And then you go into everything else you described with the CST.
Yes, okay. 100%.
So let's talk about, real quick, how you use the term TBI. What is that?
It is a traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
So, if you kind of come up on someone and one pupil is not as big as the other one, you have a problem.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. Anytime folks throw out the acronyms and stuff, especially if I don't know what it means, I'm going to ask for the audience as well. So when we think, progressing, like one of the things I want to get out of this interview is just kind of introduce again the civilians to what this experience is like, because just like you said at the beginning of the interview, eventually we have many of these military folks who have done sterile processing come into the civilian hospital, like once they've done air service, and then they're transitioning back over to the other side. And, we don't really know what you guys have been through, what you know, what you don't know, what exposure you have. Your description, though, about the blended roles is something that we do hear a lot, that you got to do both. You're the surgical tech, and then the case ends, and then you're following your instruments, down to decontam or like down a couple of feet to decontam, whatever the scenario is that you're working in. But yeah, what are the other specific kinds of unique challenges that CSTs and sterile processing professionals face in the Navy that may not be common to the civilian side of things?
I love this question. So this is I don't know how people will take this, but I will preface that with saying, for me, personally, I welcome and absolutely love a challenge every day. So I'm okay with it. But this is a very massive barrier that you need to, come across when you're in this particular position. So I would say that the biggest challenge as a SPD professional, as a CST, you 100% will be juggling numerous very, very critical priorities. So you're already a surg tech, you're an SPD professional. Take my situation, for example. I handle all equipment purchases, vital signs machines, anesthesia machines, sterilizers, you name it. I create, negotiate, and maintain service contracts in support of those anesthesia machines, DI water for SPD, you name it. I coordinate the resources for each orthopedic surgery. I'll stop there for the sake of time, but this is what we're dealing with. So this particular position, when you're in charge of sterile processing, you can't make errors. This is a very critical side of surgery that, everyone within that department needs to be like 100% perfect, because bad things can happen. I'm just going to give one tough situation that I experienced in particular really quickly. The interesting part of it is this situation, and I promise you, would not happen on the civilian side. So let's just say the story may or may not have happened. Okay, so I scrubbed in for a case at 7 a.m., probably 6:30, and then I scrubbed out of that same case at 7 p.m. So there was no water breaks, there was no bathroom breaks. I scrubbed in at 6:30, I left the room at 7 p.m. All of those instruments needed to be processed prior to leaving that day due to limited instrumentation and the fact that the exact same type of procedure was on the schedule the next day. It was a multi-ligament reconstruction, ACL, LCL, MCL. We had to re-prep and re-drape for 2 other procedures for this one patient. Now, going from, this position where you're scrubbed in for that long and you have to be on your A game, now you have to reprocess everything from top to bottom.
That's right. You're back on your A game.
Yep, you're back on your A game. It's a different
game, but you're back on the A game doing different things, right?
Yes, exactly. So this is something that can happen if you are, in the Navy or the military in general, and you're in this field. These are just some things that you have to be prepared for, and you have to give it 100 million%, because that could be your mom on the table, that could be anyone. So that's really important.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic that you describe, because what is absolutely different from civilian to military life is the hospital doesn't own my housing. Right? Like the hospital is like not paying me for my housing. The hospital's not paying me for my meals. The hospital's paying me a rate, like a daily rate. They pay me my hourly employment contract, but the military is a little bit different. They kind of, I won't say they own y'all, but you kind of live in the company town. You eat the company food. You buy your stuff at the company store. So that dynamic, of course, as you described, the unique challenge that comes around with this is not a competitive environment where there's a hospital across the town that if you don't like your job, you can go work at that other hospital because you've got options. No, like your boss is Uncle Sam and you've signed up for X amount of years. And so you're going to need to put in the work, to your point, to get it done, whatever the scenario is, especially if that's a combat scenario. Obviously that's a even higher stress, even less resources in terms of time and instruments and people and everything else that you described. So I think that is exactly the kind of answer that I wanted to get across, specific again to the civilian side of things, where, we may complain, hey, I didn't get my break after 2 hours or 3 hours on the floor. And then we got military guys like, what are you talking about? You guys get breaks. But anyways, so you alluded to something, though, that I do want to go to here, my next question, and that's the idea of growth, because you described it. Hey, when you're leading these departments, many times because of the blended nature of the role, if you've got to have CST experience and credentials in order even to do sterile processing, that means in this growth trajectory, it's kind of baked in. You would not just be growing in a sterile processing silo, but you would be growing in the perioperative growth pattern, right? Like you're growing in the operating room, in supply chain. So talk us through both, like this could be for civilians that are maybe considering military service. It could be for people that are in the hospital corpsman training process right now, thinking like, what is my growth potential? What can people expect if they're coming into this and they're like, I want to be a CST, I want to be sterile processing, but then where do I go from there?
Right. This is something that I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to be in this position because, there's all these things that the workload is, seemingly fairly excessive. But the thing is, I would say the best thing about it is the fact that with all of this comes a lot of autonomy. So let's say, for example, a brand new surgical tech straight out of school absolutely hits the ground running, and they pick up everything with little effort, and they want more. And they tell me, hey, I want to be in charge of, developing, maintaining the service contracts. Very critical role. And they say, I want to manage our equipment, all of it, critical role. Or, I want to be a member of the value analysis team. They can do that. They can do that within 2 years, within 1 year. They can utilize a program which the Navy calls Navy Cool. It is specifically stands for the Credentialing Opportunities Online. So what that is you can sign up and have the Navy fund a certificate. So you can have the HSPA, CRCST, the CER, CIS. If you really want to, you can branch out and get certified nationally in billing and coding. All of that is all in your hands. Like you have the world in your hands in that sense. And if you have a department in your particular place of work, you can go ahead and say, hey, can I shadow down here? And then you can have your examination completely funded, all the maintenance fees completely funded. So that autonomy is what really kept me going, because I came to my facility as a surgical tech. I wasn't high ranking. I was just a surgical tech, and I was straight out of school. But immediately, I was working 70 hours a week, maybe. I was in every case. They told me, hey, you need to be in ortho cases. We want you to be an ortho tech. I said, okay, fine. But then I told them I'm going to be in actually every specialties case. And then all of a sudden I said, hey, I want to be in charge of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then I mastered it. I took all of the time I could, weekends, after work, to being an absolute nerd on these things, you know? So this is something that there's a lot of autonomy, and you can really do whatever you want, in a sense. And there's a lot of things, even as a surge tech, that you wouldn't be able to do in the civilian world. So surge techs are kind of limited to certain things. Me personally, I am allowed to suture patients' closing at the very end of the case. I am allowed to set up the grafts. I am allowed to do whatever I want, as long as I have the trust from the surgeon. That's the main thing. You have a lot of autonomy within and outside of your profession.
Right. Yeah, that description, I know, on the surgical tech side of things, very different, obviously, from the civilian space. And it even depends on the state what they allow their certified surgical techs to do and not do, and if you need any other additional credentials in order to affect that outside of military life. So I think, yeah, that's another great example of just how different it is. But then to your point about the awesome opportunities that you get training wise, you can be exposed to in that scenario where you've got structure and your description of the cool project and it just the awesome resources that you have to that. I know there's a lot of civilian health systems that will fund certain programs, like sometimes they have reimbursement, sometimes they don't. But yeah, to have all of that at your fingertips, have a process and a program that you just sign up for and complete, and then the Navy pays for. I mean, that's just such a winning scenario and I really want to call this out because I loved your description of it, if you're hungry for growth, because nobody is coming in and, working their 40 hours, clocking out and going home and not doing anything. Those people are not going to grow whatever scenario you're in. If you're in the Navy, you're not going to grow that way. And if you're in the civilian world, if you're not hungry for what you're describing here, the way that you described, like, hey, I want to have responsibility for these other areas. I want to work extra. I want to see these other service lines. That is all describing someone who really wants to grow. And because you're in the leadership role, if you have someone working for you that's doing those things, that's showing you signs of hunger for growth, you will keep feeding them as much as you possibly can to let them keep growing, because there's so few of those people out there. And when you find one and you can trust one and they're dependable, I mean, you'll feed them until they grow to the moon, because it only helps you and the department and the rest of the team, to have those high performers grow. So I just really, really want to call that out for anyone tuning in. Inside and outside of the Navy, you want to be that kind of person for personal and professional growth.
Yeah, it absolutely makes me so happy to talk to these hungry people that are, they just want more and they want to contribute more, because in my experience, it just feels absolutely amazing to know that you can provide that value for your team, and you're doing that much more, not only for your team, but you're doing it for the patient, because there's all these things that you can do, and of course it's benefiting everyone from top to bottom within your particular staff, but all these things are contributing to the quality of the patient care. There's more eyes on everything. There's just more contribution overall. So I just think we absolutely need those people, and for me it puts the biggest smile on my face.
Yeah, well, let's transition to talking about transitions here. I know in my time in working in Kentucky, I worked at a hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, so we were pretty close out there to Fort Knox and to some other bases, close enough that we worked with a lot of military personnel and their families, their spouses as well, that were in the process of transitioning out into civilian life. And I know enough just from the outside looking in, I know that is not an easy process for many folks for a lot of different reasons, and hopefully you can share some of those. That's coming soon for you. Like you alluded to, your time is almost coming now to make the jump yourself. Why is this so difficult? And what are some thoughts that you have specific to clinicians, right? Because you got some people that are transitioning out and like you're a mechanic on tanks and you're like, yeah, there's not really a tank mechanic job out there in the civilian life. But, physicians and clinicians, there's hospitals, there's surgical techs, there's sterile processing, there's jobs like that. How is that different maybe for that veteran clinician than maybe some of the other vets that are coming out?
So I can mainly speak to the surgical field, but I will say in general there are so many opportunities that I came across when I was starting my job search that I was just kind of shocked by, because there's all these interesting companies making an impact out there in healthcare specifically that I just had zero clue about. If you're in the surgical field, you have to pay close attention to, what devices and implants are your surgeons using. Is it, XYZ big company? Representatives are almost always present in these cases. They're guiding the surgeons through the proper use of their product. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You can be doing that too, and if you're in the logistics side of things, there's companies that handle the implementation and provide ongoing support for organizations that want efficient warehouse management systems, distribution management systems, point of use, you name it. There's so many companies using AI to just, optimize every aspect of your hospital. And, you've likely had these kind of issues that these companies are solving. So, do your research and see if you can contribute, because, I can guarantee that there absolutely is, because I've done this research. I've spent so many hours and there's so many different companies that are contributing to our mission in healthcare. And it's just a matter of doing your research and seeing what you really want, and then trying to make those connections as early as possible.
Yeah, this is going to be a random example here, but as you were describing that, it brought me back to college. I had a full scholarship to be a history major in college, and so I got accepted to the state college here, Texas A&M. I went full scholarship to study history. And then I kind of messed around my freshman year, and I didn't keep my 3.0 grade average that I had to keep to get the full ride. I got like a 2.98, and they were like, no, like 3 is already low enough. We're not going to let you go those extra like points and then still let you keep it. So I lost that scholarship at the beginning of my sophomore year. And, for all the reasons, like really disappointed, really dumb on my part to let that happen. But it gave me a really interesting opportunity in life that I thought I was going this one direction to be a history teacher. And when I lost that, the whole world opened up and I could do anything that I wanted to do now. Like, what did I want to do? Because I was going to pay for my own education at this point. And then I can major in anything literally under the sun that I wanted to major in. And the way that you described kind of coming out of the military into civilian life it's kind of the same thing. You've been in this pathway in the military, and it's locked in because there's growth and there's flexibility, obviously. But then you come out into the civilian world, and I mean, the world is wide open, and there's so many different companies that are doing awesome, creative, fun, exciting things that could utilize your skill set, but not necessarily clocking in with the same title, right? It's like not necessarily coming out and doing surgical tech in a hospital or coming out and doing sterile processing in a hospital. You can leverage that with all kinds of different companies, startups, multi-billion-dollar consulting agencies, you name it. And I think as frightening as that can be and overwhelming as that can be, it's also really, really cool and really exciting for folks to have that opportunity at the stage in life that you're at, right? Because you're not a college student. You've got great life experience. Now you got all these credentials, and you're coming in to bring real value into the civilian employers. So I think that's really cool. So we're almost out of time here, Nate. we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm assuming that you may have a final thought or two to leave us with today, either for the civilian clean freaks that are tuning in, maybe some other military folks that are tuning in thinking like, yeah, what do I need to be doing right now to get a job at the end of all this? What are some final thoughts that you'd have for those folks?
My final thoughts, what I would say, is actually pretty simple. Stay curious. I think I've talked to a lot of higher up positions within companies outside of the Navy, a medical device, whatever it may be. And what they really want is somebody that cares. They want someone that will show up and, give absolutely anything their all. And I mean, even in the military, you can come in the military without a degree. You can come in with nothing. And if you are willing to learn and you're willing to put in the time to excel at something, you're going to get all the support you need, and you're going to get the support you need to grow past that. I really think it's that simple. And also, I guess something worth considering is I'm a fairly young guy. I haven't had tons of experiences. I'm definitely an adult. I'm only 26, but I'm excited to see where sterile processing goes. I think there's so much improvement to happen, and I think I think you will expand on that at some point, or you will in some other podcast or whatever it may be. But trust me when I say that I will be in your DMs trying to kind of give you some ammo there, because I have 100,000 ideas.
Great. Okay. Well, Nate, it's a pleasure crossing paths with you. Obviously, like, we've been connected for a little while here. It's reaching out to find some awesome guests for the Texas podcast. We were able to reconnect and kind of get you on the show today. Great insight. Obviously, your passion is very transparent, not only for this industry, but just for broadly making an impact in healthcare. And I know you've already gone places, but you're going to continue to go places, and it'll be real cool to be able to see that up close here. And yeah, thank you again for your time. And yeah, looking forward to getting this episode out to the masses. Okay.
Absolutely, Hank. Thank you so much. And I look forward to bothering you about all these things, and, maybe being back sometime. That would be awesome.
All right. That was Nate Gonzalez, OR in supply chain operations, based out of the great state of Texas and serving our country in the Navy today. If you got more questions or comments about this episode, please feel free to reach out to us, and I can get you in contact with Nate as well. If you're one of those companies that we're talking about that's out there changing the world, and maybe you're interested in talking to Nate about a job opportunity, he would probably entertain some things as well. So don't be shy. For everybody else, I'm always looking for great stories like this to bring out of Texas that Clean Freaks are working on, that they're a part of. So please reach out with those ideas and insights for the show. And until we talk to you again, keep fighting dirty. If you loved today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review, because this fight against bioburden is as big as Texas. If you've got a sterile processing tip, story, or even product that's making it easier for Texas Clean Freaks to fight dirty, we want to hear about it. Connect with us on social media anywhere you find Beyond Clean. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. Until next time, lasso up those dirty trays and saddle up those sterilizers, because we're about to show the world why everything's cleaner in Texas.